I have seen and killed real evil. I'm not talking about people. Well, I've killed plenty of them too. But no man compares to real evil. No man is capable of the same atrocities and chaos that real evil inflicts. I hunted giants during my first deployment to Afghanistan, and they are the epitome of evil. I'm a U.S. Army Ranger. I've been serving in BAT for 12 years, and I've seen and killed the scariest shit imaginable. I haven't told anyone for the fear of what would happen to my family and me. I lay awake most nights, wishing I could tell my wife what I've encountered. My mind and soul break in from the weight that I have to carry. I relive the horrors every night when I go to sleep. I've kept it all to myself until I found this page. I recognized many of the stories posted by my brothers in the spec ops and military on such pages, and I realized that I finally had an outlet. I've checked in on some of the posters to confirm that they're still breathing. I guess the government assumes that these pages are fake, so they don't monitor it. What I'm about to share with you is entirely real. You deserve to know what lies in the shadows. You deserve to know what they're hiding from you. And you deserve to know about the men and women who have sacrificed their lives to keep the forces of evil at bay. Skip the next few minutes if you're knowledgeable in the spec ops community. It's important that you have a basic understanding before I get to the crazy shit. I promise you that the story that will follow will be worth the wait. Army Rangers are a Tier 2 spec ops unit along with the Green Berets, the SEALs, the Marines, the Force Recon, and the MARSOC. The Tier 1 consists of the CAG, the Daramisa Force, the Dev Group, the SEAL Team 6, and numerous groups that I won't speak about. There's value in being unknown to the world. We are often joined by Tier 1 groups from around the world, which are usually the SAS, the Brits, the Aussies, the Kiwis, and the Joint Task Force 2, the Canadians. Tier 2 consists of the top 1% of the military. Tier 1 generally only recruits the best from Tier 2. We all trained for years for selection and qualification schools. We all possess top secret security clearances, or higher. We're all very good at killing, and we all will forfeit our freedom or lives, and possibly those of our families, if we share what we've done. Our government utilizes spec op units because we work in secret. We are the best, we are well funded, and we can deploy anywhere in the world without congressional approval and declaration of war. You'd be shocked by how many countries and which countries that we're currently serving in. Our track record is impeccable, but usually it's close to the public. I am 34 years old, a major, and I have been serving in BAT, the Range Battalion 1st, 2nd, and 3rd for the past 12 years. I am from Kansas City and a Missouri grad. I am currently attending a military school at Fort Leavenworth while I work on my PhD from Kansas State and await my next deployment to some hellhole. The good news is that I had plenty of time to share my experiences before I head back out. My first encounter with real evil happened during my first deployment to Afghanistan. It was 2009. I remember checking the computers in Kuwait while awaiting the C-130 to take me to Bagram, the airbase in Afghanistan. I was excited that the Chiefs had just signed Matt Castle, thinking that we'd be headed to the Super Bowl soon. Talk about naive. Anything to get my mind off what awaited me. Death, paralysis, loss of limbs. I was 24, just a year out of college, and I didn't even have a serious girlfriend. I had a lot to live for. I pushed it out of my mind, leaning on the fact that I'd be leading the baddest motherfuckers on the planet. My Rangers would get it done, and I would make my battalion and Rangers proud. I flew into Bagram at 2200 hours with a couple dozen other soldiers, wearing our IOTVs, bulletproof vests, and Kevlar helmets. The C-130 was dark. Only the dim green lights illuminated the inside. Those around me glowed with an alien green. The pilot gave us a warning to strap in as he began his descent, circling over the airfield and shooting flares to ensure that no RPGs could hit us on the way down. Some fobbit whimpered and cried in the corner, while the NCO, making eye contact with me, yelled at the soldier to stop being a bitch as he rolled his eyes with a small grin. The ramp lowered, slamming hard into the smudged runway with a loud metallic crack. I grabbed my gear and I head out into the dark. A huge staff sergeant yelled, "Ramsey, get your shit and follow me!" Staff Sergeant Bellamy was 6'5" and built like a brick house, and his shaved tatting looked like the Hispanic version of The Rock. He led me to the Spec Ops gated community on the base. It was a storage container, which had 3 sleeping quarters divided by plywood. He told me to throw my gear on and head to the TOC, the Tactical Operations Center. The commander had a mission for me. I stood in the TOC in full gear. M4 hanging from my sling and Glock in my leg holster, looking at the dozens of TV screens and soldiers monitoring radios. The room was full of chatter. Too much chatter. Something big was going on. My commander, Lieutenant Colonel Williams, introduced himself, telling me that I was in the big leagues now, and to shut up and do exactly what Captain Jacob said. He then ushered me into the side room. I looked around and realized that this wasn't going to be a normal mission. Bellamy sat at the table with 8 others, their sleeves bare, no ranger scrolls. I realized it was an ODA, an 8-man team of the Green Berets. My commander started his brief. Team 329 went missing approximately 4 hours ago in a desolate portion of the Alisay Mountains. The last transmission came in broken. They were escorting a CIA operative to a cave high in the mountains. We haven't been told anything out. We're sending in Team 357 for search and rescue. Ramsey, you and Bellamy are tagging along. Your platoon is on a mission for another few days, so you're going to get some experience learning from CPT Jacob and his team. The C2 intel officer stepped in and provided as much detail as he could for the mission, while my commander pulled me out of the room. Ramsey, we don't know what the hell is going on. The CIA are being shitbags as usual. They left the teams and us in the dark. I want you and Bellamy to get as much intel as possible while you're there. These fuckers are going to get our guys killed for something we don't know what for. I met CPT Jacob and his team at their vehicles. 3 Humvees that had been stripped down. They basically looked like dune buggies with miniguns mounted on top. CPT Jacob looked me in the eyes. He had a steely resolve, but there was worry behind his eyes. He raised his hand above his head and said, "Ramsey, aim high." I responded, "Roger, sir." Headshots. Gathering that he meant the enemy had body armor on. He looked at me again, fiercely serious, and fully extended his arm above his head. "No! Aim high!" I nodded, and we all loaded into the vehicles. Is he saying that they'll hit us from the top of a cave? I remember thinking. I pushed the thought out of my mind as we took off. We left Bagram while it was still pitch dark, as we rode through the hot desert night. I was constantly scanning the perimeter, waiting to be ambushed on the road. I looked back at the huge, bearded team of guys. They were all looking straight ahead. They all seemed to know something that I didn't. They had zero concern for the road, and seemed to be a million miles away in their minds. It was as if the real threat far exceeded what we had seen from the Hajis en route. We hit the Alisay Mountains a couple hours later, pulled into a small combat outpost and dismounted. Ammo, grenades, water, and MVGs is all that CPT Jacob said. I grabbed my assault pack as one of the team guys tossed me a few grenades and extra mags. We stepped out from the COP, moving up the mountain at a white formation. I remember thinking that we were invincible, as I looked back at these huge warriors, carrying M4 Scars, M2 sniper rifles, and 203 grenade launchers. These guys probably had taken down an entire Al-Qaeda unit by themselves. They had the look, the one you earn from taking the lives of other men. I felt like I was superhuman. Little did I know what awaited us. We came upon the cave just as the sun was cresting the mountain. The sky was blood red as the darkness faded into oblivion. The cave looked like the mouth of a giant serpent. The opening wall on the other side of the sheer ledge that stood 10 to 15 feet high. As we approached, Jacob said, "Eyes up, keep your distance." As we got within 100 meters of the cave, I saw something shiny on the ground. I signaled for the squad to halt, and I called Jacob over. It was a radio. The mic had been ripped off and the radio had a massive dent. Dried black blood caked on the side of it. Chunks of skin and tissue littered the area. Jacob said, "Shit, James," as his face turned to anger. He stood up as one of the team guys pulled out some climbing gear. He fastened it, and we all climbed the ropes as silently as we could. I was the last and the prone. They were pointing their weapons at the cave opening. As soon as I was up, the squad stood and started to move slowly towards the cave. One of the team guys took point and took a few steps towards the cave. I was overcome with the worst smell imaginable, like sulfur, shit, and rotten milk. I began to get an intense feeling of despair and hopelessness. It wasn't the adrenaline rush and heightened senses of a normal engagement. It felt evil. Just as E put his hand up to motion for us to stop, I heard the deepest, loudest roar emanate from the cave. It sounded like a cross between a man yelling and the roar of a lion, but blended in an impossible manner. Before we knew it, something huge came charging out of the cave and impaled E with a massive spear, lifting him 15 feet off the ground. I looked in amazement at what looked like a huge man. It was absolutely massive, standing 13 to 14 feet tall, its shoulders as wide as I am tall. It had a loincloth on and leather sacks on its feet. We were all momentarily frozen. There was an absolute sense of pure, unbridled evil that emanated from this thing. Finally, Captain Jacob yelled, "Headshots!" We all unleashed a barrage of rounds into its head and face. 9 soldiers all emptying 2 to 3 magazines worth of ammo into the beast. It dropped E, who was still skewered on the spear, and began to charge me, the ground shaking with every step. It looked at me with such cruelty and disdain, open mouth revealing 2 rows of giant teeth. I felt like an ant that was about to be stomped on by a child. It yelled something, in another language that I didn't understand, its voice splitting my eardrums. As it reached out its massive hand to grab me, it finally fell, riddled with bullets, its head and face caved in. Captain Jacob empties another magazine of 7, 62 into the giant's head before going to check on his body. It took 3 of us to lift the spear, and another 2 to pull his body off of the spear shaft, which makes a sucking noise as we pull him off. The spear ripped out his entire chest cavity. His ribs are splintered and sticking straight out like crooked, jagged teeth. All of his internal organs lay in a pile on the desert floor. The 5 of us covered in his warm, sticky blood. Captain Jones called in the sit rep and requested transport. We all sat down for what seemed like an eternity of silence. Normally after a mission we would joke around and tell the most inappropriate stories. It's tradition. Makes the horror of war feel a little more acceptable. But today was different. Every eye was glazed over. Everyone sat facing away from the giant. We had seen and felt real evil. This thing was not a man. Being in its presence brought on a feeling of hopelessness that I can't begin to describe. It was like all the joy, hope, and good had been sucked out of the world, replaced by despair and agony. We finally stood up and examined the beast. It had 6 fingers on each hand. Its hands were large enough to wrap around my torso. Its mouth revealed 2 rows of teeth, with each tooth being the length of my finger. The hair on its head and beard was a natural shade of red. I wrapped my hand around its fingers in an attempt to lift its arm. I couldn't even get its hand off the ground. The spear, still dripping with blood, weighed as much as the logs that we used in training. That required 6 men to lift above our heads. We stepped into the cave, seeing hundreds of human bones, chunks of skin, tissue, and military uniforms littered in a pile. In the corner were hundreds of weapons, modern guns like M4S and FALs, rusted-out AK-47, and ancient swords, spears, and shields. It's like I was keeping trophies. Transport showed up 15 minutes later. A bunch of CIA ops walked out. One said, "Grab the Neff," the team sergeant yelled. "Freaking clowns, thanks for the intel." The agents never made eye contact. They unloaded a forklift and cargo nets, wrapping up the beast and loading him in. Captain Jacob motioned for me to come over. I asked if he was doing his closure report, a brief that officers had to fill out to summarize battles. He said no, wait for it. Shortly after, one of the agents walked over and pulled out a piece of paper. It was a pre-filled closure report, detailing how we had been ambushed by the Al-Qaeda, and E had been killed before we scared them off. He said, "Sign here." Captain Jacob signed and motioned for me to do the same. With a threatening look, the agent said, "You can never speak of this." He turned and he walked away, and I asked, "What's a Neff?" He paused momentarily and then walked off. When we returned to Bagram, we did a full debrief. Some guy sat in the corner the entire time to ensure that we didn't speak about the giant. After the brief, my commander told me to shower and meet him at the smoke pit in 20 minutes and to ditch your electronics. Williams handed me a cigar as I approached the smoke pit. He asked me what I had seen on the mission and then explained to me that 6 other teams had encountered these giants. Most were less lucky than we were. He informed me that he was trying to figure out what the hell they were, and he did eventually. My first engagement with that giant set off a chain of events that brought me to the truth of those evil beings, and many others. After that mission was over, I was approached by one of the team guys. He removed his hat to reveal a kippa underneath. "Sir, do you want to know what that Neff said to you when it charged?" he asked, and I nodded without hesitation. It said,
"Creations of God, I will eat your souls."
He then looked me in the eye and said, "We've killed dozens of these things. We're figuring out what they are, and it does not seem good."